Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to Ovicast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring us insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In the current episode, we discuss the impact the current Covid-19 pandemic is having on the sheep sector. For the first half of this podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Kevin Hanrahan, Head of the Rural Economy and Development Programme in Teagasc. Kevin shares his views on how the global recession will impact the agri-sector with a particular focus on the sheep industry. This year, with additional pressure on family farm incomes, Kevin urges a cautious approach, paying particular attention to expenditure in the farm business for the coming season. Keeping with that theme, in the latter half of the podcast, I'm joined by Michael Gottstein, Head of Sheep in Teagasc. Michael highlights the key areas where costs can be reduced and where the easy gains are to improve efficiency. With uncertainty in the economy, Michael also discusses farm investment for the coming season. Kevin, thanks very much for joining us on this episode of Ovicast. Good to have you on.
You're welcome, Kieran.
Kevin, the current COVID-19 pandemic, it's affecting every facet of our lives and it's something we see affecting people worldwide. And look, it's had many tolls on us, but I suppose one of the lasting effects of it will be an economic consequence. I know this is something both you and your team have looked at in more detail, particularly in an agricultural context. How do you see that playing out over the next couple of months?
Yeah, you're right. It's having a big economic impact, and the way we economists think about it is that there's this epidemic out there, the pandemic, COVID pandemic, and that is required in terms of its control a public health response. The restrictions that we're all living under, and those restrictions have a massive negative impact on the freedom people have to just go about their daily lives and their business and their farming activities. So for many parts of the economy in Ireland and in the European Union and globally, economic activity has in some places just stopped, and in other places is going on at a much reduced rate. And when economic activity stops, the income that comes from that activity also stops. And what's happened, governments have basically tried to step into the breach and supported people's incomes who can't do what they normally would have expected to do in terms of getting on with their work and their business lives. So, but incomes are where we are in a recession in Ireland. The European Union is in a recession. The United States is in a recession, and that means people have less money to spend. And the unusual thing about where we are right now is that this is the first time since the 1920s that the whole world basically is in a recession at the same time. Often recessions in one country are kind of, offset by growth somewhere else, and that growth in the other place helps pull the country that's in recession slowly out of the hole. The big challenge we have right now is that there isn't really any place in the world that's growing strongly. So what that means is that the current recession that we're in won't probably be a short and sharp one. Initially people thought we'd go into this kind of for a few months, it'd be horrible, there'd be a lockdown, then those lockdowns would be eased and we'd come out of things pretty promptly. Unfortunately, it seems much more likely that the recession that we're now in will last through this year and probably through 2021 as well. And what that means is that people have less money to spend in their pockets, and some of that spending is on on goods and services linked to the output of sheep, cattle, dairy farmers, tillage farmers in general in Ireland, in the European Union, across the world. And when that spending goes down, the demand for what farmers produce out the farm gate goes down. And unfortunately, usually that means, at least in the short run, that prices will fall because, sheep farmers, for example, they've all lambed their lambs for this year. That supply is there. They're gambling about in the fields at the moment, and we're hoping they'll start to run into the factories quite soon. So that supply is sort of almost fixed. It was decided when rams were put to use last year. Now, no one predicted this pandemic, and there's nothing farmers really can do about it. But prices almost certainly will fall because people are eating a lot less lamb, because just about every food service outlet in the European Union is currently shut, and that's where most of our lamb is consumed. So that's the big issue for farmers. The economic activity on farming is continuing. People are delivering lambs to factories to be killed. Prices haven't really tumbled yet on sheep markets, but I think we can expect them to decline over the next few weeks.
That change in lifestyle activities is going to have that knock-on effect. And to be fair, above all sectors, probably agriculture has been less disturbed by it than some others. I'm just thinking, Kevin, like one of the consequences, and you mentioned it earlier, it is a global recession this time. And as you said before, when every country is in recession, there's less chance of one's pulling out of it. It's going to have an impact on employment. And we know in the dry stock sector, we are dependent on off-farm income or a second income in a household. It's likely that we could see employment levels rise. Where do you see that going?
Well, the Department of Finance think that we could be at 20% unemployment quite quickly. We were effectively at a full employment economy only 6 or 7 weeks ago. And a full employment economy doesn't mean there's zero unemployment, but it means that, generally speaking, if you want to find a job, you get one. It mightn't be a perfect match for you, but you could find one. We're not in that world anymore, unfortunately. And you're right, dry stock farmers in particular and their households have a pretty high dependence on off-farm jobs. And we know from research we did during the last big recession back in 2008, 2009, that there's lots of farmers, sheep and cattle farmers, who have jobs off-farm or their spouses work in sectors of the economy that are particularly hard hit, are likely to be hard hit by this pandemic. So you're talking about the service sector, working in restaurants, working in bars, working in hotels, B&Bs, driving trucks. Some of this activity will be very robust to it, but some won't be. And those households that have high dependence and have in the past maybe subsidized their farming business with their off-farm income, you really need to be very careful well, they won't be able to do that if jobs are lost. Now, for the time being, the government is providing relatively generous welfare assistance to people who've lost their job, who are reduced working time, who are being furloughed by their employers. But people out there shouldn't assume that that's going to continue ad infinitum. I think that it's likely to be kind of ratcheted back in due course. And what that means is that in terms of we need to be looking within the farm gate to make sure that where we can save money and leave more money in your pocket at a household level, that you do that.
Like as you mentioned there already, production is already in train this year, so it is essentially a year to really watch expenditure and avoid any unnecessary expenditure on farm level.
Yeah, insofar as people are able to do that, and I understand it's not like they can just basically totally ratchet back on feeding concentrates and getting pastures into good nick in terms of the use of fertilizer and so on. But if a farm business was sort of considering some sort of what you might imagine is a bit of a discretionary spend in terms of upgrading fencing, or you need to basically just really think about whether it's essential that you do that this year, and think about postponing some of that sort of expenditure.
Okay, Kevin.
It's going to be a difficult year.
Certainly, it's one to approach with due caution. Thank you very much for coming on with us, and look, it's something we might revisit with you later on in the summer.
Happy to talk to you, Kieran, and your listeners whenever you want me.
Michael, thanks very much for coming back to join us on this episode.
You're welcome, Kieran.
Earlier in the podcast, we had Kevin Hanrahan on, and we were discussing the long-term potential impact the COVID-19 situation will have on the economy and potentially on the sheep sector. I suppose if there was ever a year to focus on costs and reducing expenditure on farm or necessary expenditure, this is it. Of course, we can't bulletproof our sector or our farms. What steps can we take, Michael, this year to possibly reduce some of the risk on farms?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, Kieran, as Kevin has said, there's lots of unknowns out there, but the one thing is, I suppose, it's a year where we could potentially see issues in terms of off-farm employment, money coming in, and also on the farm. So look, what we're really advising farmers to do is to be careful with expenditure. And it's looking first maybe at the variable costs. If we look at the profit monitor data or look at data from the National Farm Survey, one of the top costs coming in there every year is concentrate feed or meal. So we're not anti-meal. We're not saying there's no scope or space for meal or concentrates on a sheep farm, but certainly there is a significant scope on most farms or many farms to reduce it. And this year what we're saying to do is, focus on a couple of issues. So the first one is grass. Okay, grass is the cheapest feed. What we're trying to do is grow our lambs as much as we can off grass. So the couple of key things that people should look out for this year is walk your paddocks. Walk your fields or your paddocks every week and identify how much grass you have. And if you see grass starting to get strong, that grass that is going over 10, 11 centimeters, you need to start taking out paddocks. That's kind of the max height. We don't want lambs going into heavy grass. They won't perform on it. Okay. Prioritize your lambs. So lots of farmers will have cattle and sheep. Give the lambs the best grass. Maybe use your dry cattle or suckler cows or dry ewes to come in after them and clear out. Take out those heavy paddocks. When the grass is getting ahead of you, take out a couple of paddocks. Take them out quick. Don't lock them up for weeks and weeks and take big heavy crops. Take out, maybe close up a paddock, leave it grow for another week or 10 days. Take it out. Real leafy, high quality silage in round bales. Stack it somewhere separate to the rest of the silage and mark it. And that's the silage you can feed the ewes going into next spring in late pregnancy, and really, really reduce your meal bill, because that'll be really, really good quality grass silage. But it will also help you to manage your grass and maintain the animal performance, the lamb performance off the grass throughout the summer. And then later on in the year, when it gets more difficult to finish lambs off grass and we have to start introducing a little bit of concentrate feed or meal, at that stage, maybe prioritize lambs for feeding. So have finishing groups. Pull out the lambs that are, 38 to 42 kilos for maybe a bit of meal feeding, just to get them up to that 44 or 45 kilo slaughter weight, or whatever slaughter weight you're going for. So what we're trying to do there really is to use as much grass as we possibly can and reduce the expenditure on concentrate feed.
So essentially, reduce the cost of your finishing and make better use out of your grass for later in the season. Michael, the other big variable cost you see on farms is health, of course, and look, it has a major impact on performance. What can we do as the year progresses on that side of it?
Yeah, so probably the second biggest variable cost on sheep farms is the veterinary health expenditure. Okay, and I mean, we can look at that. Really, there's probably 3 or 4 issues again there. So the first one is parasite control, stomach worms. All farmers or most farmers are dosing their lambs for worms. Is the dose working? The work that we've done, that Orla Keane has done and Barbara Good has done over the years, shows that on a lot of farms, the anthelmintic or wormers that we have no longer kill a lot of the parasites that are out there. So, it varies from farm to farm, and it varies by product that you're using. So make sure that if you're dosing lambs for worms because they have worms, that the dose has worked. Go back and check after you've dosed them, 7 to 14 days, depending on the product you use. Check that you've cleaned them out. And if not, you need to formulate some other control strategy, either use multiple doses or different doses to make sure that we're not feeding parasites instead of feeding the lambs. So that's the first one. Make sure that we get the performance from the grass and the meal if we're feeding a bit of meal. The second one is lameness. Okay, so in lame lambs, you'll knock 50 to 100 grams a day off the growth rate of a lamb that is lame. No bother at all. And if he's lame on more than one leg, you're probably in negative territory in terms of performance and growth rate. So have a strategy for controlling lameness. When you see the first of your groups of lambs getting lame, bring them in, proper foot bathing, and if it's foot rot, probably an antibiotic treatment as well. Fly strike. So again, an issue as the year will get warmer, as we come into the end of May, early June. So try to keep our lambs clean. And also go in early with the fly strike prevention measures. Don't wait until lambs are struck and then have to spend a lot of time dagging and cleaning and try and get on top of the problem. Go in early with our preventative measures to prevent lambs from getting struck in the first place. That basically prevents us having performance loss in those lambs. But it also solves a lot of the issues around long withdrawal periods with some of the preventative measures we have. If the lambs are treated relatively early before they're coming close to finishing. They'll have seen out the withdrawal period of those products by the time they're finished. And I suppose lastly, Kieran, the last point and where people can spend quite a bit of money is on mineral supplementation. A lot of money spent on mineral supplementation for people that don't have mineral problems or don't know whether they have them. They just feel that they might benefit from it. And very often, the biggest mineral we're lacking is good quality grass. So look at if you have a mineral deficiency, absolutely, we need to go in with a mineral supplement. By and large, I would tend for the cheaper options rather than the more expensive ones, because they can be quite expensive. A cheap, effective oral supplement for sheep, for lambs, mostly what we're talking about is cobalt. On most farms, it's basically cobalt is going to be the mineral is going to be creating any problems. But on a lot of farms, there's no mineral issues, and there's no benefit in supplementing them, and it's a waste of money. So look, on the health, they're the four things really. Keep on top of the parasites, make sure your warmers are working. Keep on top of the lameness by foot batting lambs regularly and often. When you see the first lamb starting to get lame, you really need to get in quickly there. On the fly strike, prevent the fly strike from happening by going in early with the preventative, pour-ons or dips, whatever you're using. And on the mineral supplementation, don't supplement unless you have a problem. And if you have a problem, look at the cost-effective options, the cheaper options rather than the more expensive ones, because this year is about cost-cutting if we can.
So ensure your routine husbandry treatments are up to date, and more to the point, they're effective treatments. Mike, I'm just thinking, like with the current good weather and potentially with a lot of farmers a little bit more time on their hands this year, they've looked at projects on the farm, whether infrastructure projects or other investments. What's your advice for those farmers?
Yeah. So look at, I suppose, we're potentially facing into a global recession that has implications for money flowing in and out of the country. There's also, question mark in a lot of cases over a lot of businesses may not reopen. Unemployment is rising because of the COVID pandemic, and lots of farmers have off-farm jobs or their partners have off-farm incomes. So what I would be suggesting to farmers to do is consider very carefully large infrastructure expenditure this year. Okay, so that new Jeep, a new quad replacing a tractor, or some expensive piece of kit, or building a new shed or something like that. Large infrastructure spends which will take maybe a couple of years, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 years to pay off. Just be a little bit careful on committing to that in the current climate. Maybe wait a year or two if that's possible. What I would say is maybe this is the year to spend money on things like lime or temporary fencing to be able to split your paddocks and make better use of the grass. So they're relatively, they're not, I suppose, infrastructure spends as such. They're variable costs, but they're costs that don't happen, that maybe lots of farmers don't regularly spend, and where there is really good bang for your buck. Spreading lime, 40, 45, 50 euros an acre, 2 ton an acre, will straight away in the first year pay itself back in terms of reduced nitrogen costs. And it'll pay back for the next 3 or 4 years. The same with splitting your paddocks, buying a couple of reels and 20 or 30 plastic posts to split a few paddocks and be able to make better use of the grass will pay dividends in the first year. It's money that you get a dividend back straight away. So what I would be urging people to do this year is to be cautious about large infrastructure projects that they're planning to do. In particular, maybe where they're not 100% sure of, what way things are going to work out for them in terms of off-farm employment and money coming in for next year or two.
Certainly, return on investment, particularly short-term return on investment, is very important this year.
Absolutely. I mean, look at we're always telling people to spread lime and do temporary fencing and all that. So, but I mean, this year I think more than ever, it's important that people focus on that to try and cut their costs and improve their performance. And that's what it's about, really. We're not telling people, that the world is ending or anything like that. It's just look at it could be a little bit of a tight year for people, or maybe even next year as well, depending on how this pandemic ends up. and maybe it's just be a little bit cautious. Try and reduce your spend this year. Try and maximize your animal performance, so that the farm is bringing in as much money as possibly can.
I think that probably sums it up best. Just focus on the basics, and in particular this year on the bottom line. Michael, thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome, Kieran. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to finish the episode up at this point. It was one of the slightly longer ones, but there was quite a lot to cover in it. I would like to thank both Kevin and Michael for giving up their time and sharing their insights on the topic. If I take a couple of things from this podcast, firstly, there's a challenging period ahead for every industry. The agri sector and the sheep industry is certainly no different. The one word of caution from both our speakers was to focus on expenditure this year. If there was every year to look at cost control on farms, this is it. Michael outlined a number of areas where we can make potential savings, and that will only benefit the farm business. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any other updates from the sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in to future episodes.